Hey guys, welcome back to Baker Health Talks. I'm your co-host Mo. In today's episode, we had the privilege of interviewing our first pediatrician other than Dr. Baker, Dr. Rebekah Diamond, hospitalist at Columbia University and author of How to Parent Like a Pediatrician. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how you can parent like a pediatrician. Stay tuned.
Almost perfect.
I stuttered.
It's parent like a pediatrician.
Parent like a pediatrician. Hey guys, welcome back to Baker Health Talks. I'm your co-host Mo. In today's episode, we had the Hey guys, welcome back to Baker Health Talks. I'm your co-host Mo. In today's episode, we had the privilege of interviewing our first pediatrician other than Dr. Baker, Dr. Rebekah Diamond. Dr. Diamond is a hospitalist at Columbia University and author of Parent Like a Pediatrician. If you want to learn how to parent like a pediatrician, stay tuned.
Very excited for today's guest, and I really, really mean that, because this is the first, we've been doing this for like a year and change, and this is the first pediatrician I'm interviewing. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I am very honored.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I think that's true. I want to make sure I'm not lying. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've several cardiologists, ENT, psych, a lot of non-doctors, physical therapy. The way, I don't know, so what we try to do is try to find the folks that have tremendous information on people's health that you don't find by looking straight at the healthcare system, right? That have unique backgrounds that can come in and say, look, I know healthcare is a bit messy. I know there's a lot of misinformation. We're not dogmatic. We're not like just the professor saying do this.
Yeah.
We straddle it. We'll bring you kind of the most modern and practical stuff that will help you actually lead a healthier life, not just words on a piece of paper. And we're kind of on this journey. And you're the first pediatrician. And what we were talking about earlier, I'll just repeat as a male pediatrician, I think I have some helpful attributes, right? When my 13-year-old guys come in and they're talking about football practice and tryouts and two-a-days, I can relate. Yeah. However, all in our practice, all of the pediatricians I work with, right, there's Cindy, Diane, and Claire. All of them happen to be female. And what I was saying is, I will often kick cases to them because I need help. They usually don't have to kick anything to me.
Except maybe the teenage boys.
Yeah. They're like, Z, he's gross. Can you take this? But whether it's breastfeeding or mother stuff, postpartum stuff. And look, I don't want to be, I obviously do my research and I talk to my colleagues and I think I do a good job of supporting breastfeeding. I think I do a good job of post-maternal health. But I think I'm humble enough to know there's a limit and there's a certain empathy that comes when you actually live through it. Like my own wife, my wife's an attorney. She's not a doctor. She will hear me sometimes on the phone at 3 a.m. on a Saturday and give like, oh, well, this happened. And she's like, no, just tell them to use lanolin cream. Or like, she'll give personal advice that like, and so, you being, mother, pediatrician, and this beautiful thing you're doing where you're taking your personal experience, marrying it with your academic background and kind of translating for parents. I'm super excited. And so usually what we do is I'll have the guests talk about their personal journey and what got them to where they are. And then we could talk about the boring professional stuff. But Rebekah, I'm really glad you made the time to come out. I'm very excited for this conversation. So if you don't mind introducing yourself and your journey. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for that introduction and for having me. This is so fun and exciting. And I think that's like the exact perfect way to frame it, is that I really have gotten into this world where we're looking at the intersection of motherhood and medicine, of pediatrics and parenting. I came into this because it was a real personal void that I wanted to fill. So I'm very open about my journey. I'm a pediatrician, so I went to med school and then I went to residency. In my second year of residency, I got pregnant. I was really excited to have my child. Pregnancy was a beast and totally hard, totally impossible beyond what I could even begin to start here. But I felt like, okay, that's terrible, whatever. But I love kids. I'm a pediatrician. I'm going to have a baby. It's going to be hard because I'm a resident. Duh. Like resident hours are hard. But otherwise, it's not going to be agonizing from a new parent perspective. And I just was totally overwhelmed by how unprepared I was to be a mom, in really surprising ways of like, oh, I thought I would I thought I would know how to do my sleep setup. I was really into strict by the book safe sleep, and I would just do it and it would be fine. Check, move on. I knew I really supported breastfeeding. I wanted exclusive breastfeeding. I was very familiar with the data on it, and I had told parents that that's what they should do. So I would just do that. And then you get there and you're like, oh, there's actually 1,000 competing different demands on me. I can choose maybe 3 things to do any given week. I don't even know how to triage that. I don't know what's realistic. I don't really understand what's as important as other things. You know, is breastfeeding more important to me now, or is sleeping in a bassinet more important to me now, or is my sleep more important, or is treating my own postpartum depression more important? It was like a minute by minute dynamic situation, and I just felt like there wasn't a source that I could go to that was going to give me safe information that was also kind of realistic. Because you go to the internet, I had those moment of panics, and I'm online and I'm scrolling through and I'm saying, this person's telling me, actually, I don't have to do any safe sleep. But then I knew that was like not quite right because of what I knew. And then they also maybe would post something like also some misinformation about medicine and vaccines. And I would say, oh, I don't even know how to address this and sort through this. So then I would go to pediatrician appointments, and you know, it was like my friends. It was literally my own friends from residency. And they would say, well, you do what you're going to do, but you know what our party line is. It's safe sleep. It's this, here, breastfeeding, the checklist for this, you know. And I just was like, I was looking for something, this kind of holistic, big picture framework to try to just empower me to make parenting choices and give me permission to make good choices based on good information. I just really couldn't find it. And I started writing different pieces. I had already written some advocacy pieces, so I wrote for some medical journals. I started sharing my stories, my frustrations. I started answering, as I'm sure you're familiar with, everyone's text. Every friend who had a kid was asking me, what do I do about this? What do I do about this? And I was starting to answer things like, okay, it's actually more nuanced and complicated. Here's how you need to think about it. Everyone's like, wow, I thought you were going to say just buy this product or do this thing. But there's actually some thinking, and then I can make the decision myself. It's became the joke then, okay, so why don't you just write a parenting book if there isn't one? And I said, I'll do it. I'll write a parenting book. You know, and a few years later, my first book came out, and the social media sort of was a way for me to get out there and see, you know, what do parents need? What are they asking? What are you up against? What are you there as a resource to support you? Like you said, who are those helpers in health and parenting who I can boost and can boost me back? And so it's just been this really kind of wild journey of positioning myself, saying, like you know, as you've explained, so I went through so much, I've learned so much, why not share that? Why not give that back and also be a full-time doctor and mom? So, you know, just in my spare time.
That is awesome. That's so cool. So what's the name? How many books have you read?
I have 2 books. Okay. The first book is, I've propped them very strategically, and we'll show them around, pass them around to the class. But my first book is called Parent Like a Pediatrician, which is conveniently my handle on Instagram and my website and all of that. And that's just for the first year. Because I think that first year you go from being a person to being a parent. All the cliches are true. Like, that is just a new identity. That is a new way that your brain needs to make decisions. You have to keep this thing alive, but then also keep yourself alive. But then also maybe it could thrive too, and maybe you could enjoy it. Maybe, you know, if people will let you. So I was really determined to get that kind of like A to Z. Here's what you need to know about parenting. Here's what's worth your thought and worry. Here's kind of what's a done deal and you don't have to stress about. Here's where there's some gray areas that even people like the American Academy of Pediatrics, which I belong to, are not going to go in and talk about, you know, modifying safe sleep practices, you know, or not going to talk about the cases in which maybe you shouldn't be breastfeeding so much and you need to look out for yourself or things like that. Things that are just away from these extremes that we're seeing. The fed is best, the breast is best, always co-sleep, never co-sleep.
Right,
You
right.
know, as you know, the parenting Instagram is unhinged, to
Yeah,
say
it's-
the least.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
It's out. It looks like whatever you choose is wrong, and it makes it seem like no one's ever raised a child before.
I know. And when Mo and the team showed me some of your stuff, or maybe I came across it on LinkedIn, I forget how, and I was like, this is awesome. That's the beauty of, I mean, you're incredibly smart and you have great experience, but it's that, that pragmatism, right? Because what happens is, you're exactly right. Like what happens is I'll get parents coming in, and when they come in, they will find what they're looking for. So if the kid's not sleeping well, that mom who before she had the kid was like, I'm gonna like memorize the AAP guidelines, like did 30 prenatal consults with me, and like she's like, okay, back to sleep, blah 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 blah. Now that's not working, so then they look for and will find obviously someone who says, don't worry, he could sleep on his stomach if A B C D, or the mom who's adamant she's gonna
Right.
breastfeed, then like she's having severe post whatever, and now she's not, which is fine, but then it lends itself to more of the extremism. Whereas someone coming out the gate and saying, listen, breast is great for A, B, C, D, but it's not always the answer. Or you should try to put the baby out, but if the baby rolls over,
Yeah.
here's some things to consider. And to actually have a genuinely practical and safe approach, not something that hedges on extremes, playing off of parents' fears and desires. And what I saw that consistency in the stuff you put out there, I was like, this is like my dream interview. Like someone who really, really talks facts, doesn't, criticize the traditional institutional stuff that we were trained on. Sometimes that stuff is disproven, but there's a reason it's the stuff we talk about, because most of it makes a hell of a lot of sense, right? We don't have
Right.
all the answers, but that's generally the best set of answers we have today.
Right.
We can simultaneously say, look, we also live in the real world, right? We don't live in a lab.
100%.
And I really haven't come across anybody, we're just meeting, but at least in the social media stuff that I came across, it becomes very clear to me that like anybody who wants really practical, great advice, that is firmly rooted in like science and research, but also acknowledges real life. And you do that consistently. Like, look, here's options. There's some things are black and white, most aren't. And there's avenues towards that. And so that was amazing. And I think having you elaborate on it today, I think my suspicion was right on. And then you have another book too, right?
Yeah. So part 2, the sequel, is coming out in a few weeks. I have it here too. It's catchier title.
So it's not out yet. It's coming
not
out.
It's coming
Okay.
out in a few weeks.
Sweet.
It's the toddler book. So I'm
Okay.
going to do what I did for the first book. For the first year, you're going to get it from
Okay.
ages like 1 to 3 or 4,
Okay.
and it's eat, sleep, tantrum, repeat, which is my
That's
well,
awesome.
that's kind of what it feels like when you have a toddler.
Yeah.
But
But you said sleep.
right. Well, they sleep sometimes. Sometimes they sleep.
Right.
But it's the same thing. I sort of, after I wrote the first book, I was like, okay, great. Like now it's the toddler years. Like whatever. It's not going to be so hard. Like I already know I'm gonna be done-ish with breastfeeding, or I won't feel it will either be established or not by then. I will, have a daycare or a nanny by then. Like I'll have made all the big decisions.
Yeah.
I'll have be on track with vaccines. Like, okay, now I can just figure it out. And then of course I got sucked into toddler daycare because social media ages with you and targets you as you go through the phases. And let me tell you, when I talk about like how black and white has, these extremes have infiltrated everything, it's like things like how you talk to your kid. They're great resources. It's great. How you deal with tantrums. They're great resources. But there's also this like doctrine and this dogma that is like just setting parents up for failure.
Yeah.
I really could not believe, it was like my story, my inspiration story, origin story for writing the second book is, so during the pandemic, I was working here. I work nearby. I'd actually work in New York City. So we were in the hospital, and we were seeing all these initial cases. We were having to take care of adults. We were seeing the Miss C case. I was in a full N95 and a shield and everything for a year because I was so afraid for my daughter. And so anyway, I remember one day, it was like May 2020, I'm feeling like I just had the most stressful day, come home with a migraine. And my then like 2-year-old has a tantrum because she's 2 and just like hit me in the face, just like slapped me. And I just had this moment where I was like, don't scream, don't like do it, just do whatever, say something calm. And I said, oh, wow, that really hurts when you do that. I really don't like when you hit me in the face. And I was like, yeah, like that was great. I nailed it. And then it was like AI targeting or something. But that day I saw this influencer account come at me and being like, when your kid hits you in a tantrum, when your kid does something, never say they hurt your feelings, because that means that they are responsible for your feelings and you're not responsible for your own feelings. And I just like started crying because what had been like a very fine parenting choice I had made just got sort of like, slapped down. I was already vulnerable. I was probably crying about COVID, like if we're going to be honest, and being a toddler mom in COVID. But it was just this like the intensity of these recommendations, the certainty of the recommendations parents are getting.
Right.
They're not necessarily looking for it. Sometimes they are, but they're just online. Right. And you're getting this very specific brand of parenting that's coming your way. Right. It's not that there aren't helpful strategies to share. I use experts all the time. But it's when it comes at you with this, like you said, it's so prescriptive, it's so dogmatic that it doesn't make sense whether it's from a doctor or whether it's from an influencer or whatever. It just makes you feel like you can't be a parent, but I know you can be a parent. And when I took a minute to sort of process this, I was like, wait a minute, I did a good job. Yeah. Like, why did I let that get in my head? But if you have so much of that on your feeds, you're gonna lose this confidence, and there's just no need.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a shift, I think, into the toddler years where you're starting to really think, okay, not how am I going to keep this child alive, although that's important, and make all the right basic safety medical choices, but okay, I have to there's this little person here that I want to guide.
Yeah.
And the internet, instead of saying okay, you're going to do great, you have values, you have intuitions, here's some tools. It's actually you have to do this exact thing, and if you veer from it, your kid won't be a good person.
Yeah.
And that's a crazy amount of pressure to get as a parent.
Yeah.
So just trying to undo some of that and let parents know you can make these choices and it's okay to get help. Like, to your point, I love these villages of experts, people who have expertise, but that's what it is. It's advice, it's guidance. It's not telling you what you have to do. Only you know what what you have to do.
Rebekah, as I listen to you, a couple of points there. Now I'm going to talk as a father and as a pediatrician, and we both have a couple of kids. And now I'm going to be extremely honest with you. My wife has done 80% of our parenting, and that's the truth. Mm-hmm. I do my best, but my wife, and by the way, I wish I could hide behind the fact that it's because I'm busier than her. I'm not. Professionally, she's just as busy. Yeah. It just is the way it is. I think I'm a good parent. She's an exceptional one. But I'll give you, listening to you, there's a lot of mini truths in there that themselves are huge platforms. First of all, isn't it ironic that that emotional whirlwind you felt when you, I think, did a good job in responding to your child when they did what they did, and how you were made to feel off of social media. And as parents, we often might go to social media or whatever, and what do we constantly tell our kids to do these days? Avoid social media.
Right.
And we're constantly lecturing our kids, why would you go on Instagram? What do you mean YouTube told you that? That's garbage. And then 3 seconds later, we're going there and my kid's a picky eater, what do I do?
Yeah.
And the second thing is the 2 books that you did, it makes a lot of sense why you did that, because this is the father comment. The first year I had a kid, 2. Not that parenting doesn't matter, and not that it's a commodity, but the difference between kids, or what you can do as a parent to said kid the first 12 months is much more narrow than as they grow year over year. Meaning, the kids are born, they have to eat every 2 to 3 hours, they're going to poop, you're going to change their diaper, and they're going to sleep for 18 hours a day. You could be the most stylized parent with the most unorthodox view. It doesn't change that the kid's going to poop, eat every 2 to 3 hours. You want to be like really cool and start solids 2 months earlier or 2 months later, cool. But you're going to start solids somewhere in this neighborhood.
Right.
You're not going to give. There's a lot less stylization,
Yeah.
and in a weird way, even though you really try to gear up for when you're going to have the kid, it's a little bit more linear.
Mm-hmm.
Then as your child grows, that's where parenting or style really comes into play, and all of a sudden now it's less like, here's the way you do it, and there's a lot of opinions, but to your point, they're made to seem as fact or dogmatic when they're anything but.
Right.
Their opinions. And now in many ways it's its own version of harder, like because now it's not like put one foot in front of the other, because you have someone who says the kid has tantrums, he's 3 years old, get down to their level, make eye contact, tell them they have big feelings and, whatever.
Yeah.
Then you have someone else who says they should become completely invisible when they have a tantrum because any reaction is a bad reaction.
Right.
And both of them, I'll find myself nodding my head.
Yeah.
Right.
You're like, okay, I see your point.
And then all of a sudden you're like, these are two, like, hey, he doesn't want to eat what you made him. Let him go to sleep hungry. He won't starve to death. Or he doesn't want to eat, then you should, keep giving him what he wants until, whatever. And so it's funny because in the toddler years, it's actually where you have to kind of pick a style, or there's actually much more multiple choice there than in the infant year. So I think it's great that you kind of did this second book. I'm excited to read it because that's where I have more even curiosity in a way.
Yeah. I think the range of choices becomes a little wider when it comes to different things. And not to say that the internet hasn't made parenting impossible in the first year. They've created choices where there really aren't none. They've sowed doubt in things that should be no-brainers. That is created noise that doesn't need to be there in the first year for sure. But once you sort of weed through that noise and you add a dose of reality, which is what I tried to do to the science, you take some equal parts science and reality and you say, okay, here's your range of options. You're going to either sleep, have a safe co-sleeping setup for just in case, or you're going to co-sleep sideline and breastfeed and then place in the bassinet. Like, there's going to be a narrower range of options. It's probably not going to be black or white. It's not going to be put your baby on their belly, totally unsafe. It's probably not going to be strict every single time I can get them in their bassinet on their own. It's probably going to be this sort of in the middle range of options, but it's going to be a little bit narrower than when you get to age 2 and your kid slaps you in the face. And you're going to react to it differently at different times, but there's not going to be a single script or thing that is definitely right. There's going to be a group of things that you lean on, but it's going to be probably a wider group of options, and it's going to be a lot based on your own values and style. And I think that's really terrifying. If it's not, it could be liberating if we came at it and said, okay, here's the non-negotiables. You can't hit your kid. You can't do a few unsafe things. You should be emotionally reflecting and attentive on average. And that could be just liberating to say, but whatever you do, you'll find your way. But I think it becomes paralyzing because the expectation is, no, but I'm pretty sure there's only one way, because that's what everyone keeps saying. So I'm still sure I'm going to do it wrong.
Yeah.
And hearing there's no one right answer, there's 20 right answers.
Right.
It's probably true, but it can feel kind of paralyzing, because then you have to decide what's my one right answer for this time, and how do I know that it's one of the 20? It's one of the good ones. Right. So it's really tough. I put in my time for the first round with the toddler years. I'm about to do it again. I keep joking with my husband. I'm like, we're gonna do that again. We see like a toddler out there melting down, and we're like, that's coming. Yeah. Are you ready? You ready for it? Yeah. But it really took a lot for me to create my parenting style. Sure. And I leaned on some of this philosophy and that, and I took these behavioral strategies. And I loved hearing success stories, but I had to take a bunch of bullshit and push it away and say, ultimately, like, if I tell my kid good job, I'm going to say that till the day I die. Yeah. I don't think it's reinforced. There's all this like nonsense about saying good job isn't good and doing this isn't, I just had to come to peace with that. But it's kind of a journey. Like, you really have to trust yourself. And if you have the internet telling you not to trust yourself because they're selling you something, and that's how you sell things. Yeah. You tell people that they're not competent or they're lacking or they can't make their own choices. Yeah. Then it's really hard to be like, no, I think it's okay. I think it's okay that I calmly told my daughter, I don't like it when she punches me in the face.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know what I'd like to do, and this is more the pediatrician side. I would love to do a little bit of like quasi rapid fire on some like really stuff that you have in your books. And to just like that, I know people who are listening and going to watch this will have on their mind. And you could do like a minute on each one or whatever you're comfortable doing. But before we get to that, just to, finish off like the personal journey that led you to where you are now. It's interesting because like I'll tell my moms and my dads, I'll tell them, they'll be like, Z, how exactly how many calories, blah, 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 or exactly how many hours of sleep, blah, 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 or exactly like whatever. I'm like, dude, I'm here more to make sure you don't screw up royally than to tell you what to do. And they're like, is that what I just paid a $40 copay for? And I'm like, listen, man, I'm like, in 17 years, I've never seen two kids do the same thing.
Yeah.
And the kids, I could quote the books. I've never seen a kid do what the books say. Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Baker, like, isn't there a right and wrong? I'm like, there's right and there's wrong. Right is like all this, and wrong is like this.
Yes.
I'm going to protect you from that.
Oh, I love that image.
But there's so much like right, and you're going to figure it out. And then like when you think about, if you like, you want to, mathematicalize the whole situation, like you're changing as a person, the parent, the kid is changing. Mm-hmm. And so whatever style you had by definition has to be dynamic.
Yeah.
Unless you're telling me your 2-year-old's the same as your 6-year-old. Oh, he used to be an angel, or hey, he used to be whatever, but now he's not. Yeah. So we're acknowledging that you're changing. Mm-hmm. This vector is dynamic. Then the kid is definitely changing.
Yeah.
The world is changing.
The situation's changing around you guys. Yeah.
And all of a sudden he loves the violin. I never thought that. Well, what am I now? Am I going to make him do soccer practice?
Yeah.
So the amount of humility one has to have. And then when you go to the science side, when you go to the doctor side, we know that something like 30% of what we learn when we graduate medical school every 3 to 4 years is proven null and void. So now some things for decades don't change, and we cling to those because it's pretty obvious. But there's a portion of what we learn. Oh, you shouldn't use albuterol, just saline. That comes and goes, or start solids at 4 months, no 6 months, eggs later. And so we're humble, right? I mean, you do what we do long enough. And even when you're giving the guidelines, you do it in a measured way because you have so much humility for the ever-changing knowledge base. And so all of a sudden, if you like look at the variables of parenting, you're changing, the kid's changing, the world around them is changing, and the science is changing.
Yeah.
Anybody who's like, there's one way to do this is naive, or tells you to do that. And so if you take all that, you're like, well, Z, that's confusing as hell. And so what should we do? I really, really think intuition and common sense. And I'll tell you how I view the doctor, pediatrician kind of relationship. I really, really, really take the approach, and I'm curious about your perspective on this, really where like, I heard the term co-parenting a few years ago for the first time, like 3, 4, 5, whenever it became like a thing. Mm-hmm. And co-parenting was obviously meant for like maybe parents who got divorced and how to... I actually will tell my parents we're co-parenting. So you might have the partners and then you have us, and they're like, what do you mean, Z? And I say, listen, you guys bring stuff that I can never bring. I like your kid a lot. You love your kid.
Right.
You're around your kid 24/7. I see them for like 30 minutes every few months. And, I can do blood work on them, and I have that, but you have like their temperament, their aspirations, their ambitions. And so we all bring something to help Jimmy or Sarah be the best version of herself. Let's put that together. There's some stuff I know that can help your kid that you don't know. There's a lot of stuff that will help your kid that I don't know. And so we should co-parent. We should put it all together and have a discussion about whatever it is. Right. And, and maybe this is a personality flaw in me. I generally don't like being told what to do anyway. Same. And so, I don't take kindly to that. And so I don't see many scenarios where I come in and I tell them, hey, you're wrong, do this, or it's like, hey, what's going on? Here's that, and whether it's advising someone on how to raise or just how you talk to people, like, okay, my wife's a lawyer, right? So, somebody like me or you might need a lawyer's advice for something, right? If the lawyer comes in and be like, well, I can't believe you're looking to do that, blah, 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 blah. You stop listening already. Yeah. If they come in like, what are you trying to do? How are you trying to do this? Here's ways you could do it, blah, 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 blah. So I think somewhere along the way, two things happened that have left us in this murkiness. I think throughout history, medicine was very high. There's no industry or field that's more hierarchical, dogmatic. It was this is it. The doctor said jump out of a window, do it, right? Like it was like, God and the doctor. And then what happened in recent years is this unprecedented distrust in us.
For sure.
Right. And everybody, I don't like to be political. I'm not a political guy, but just we can acknowledge it. There's never been so much distrust.
Yeah.
And so you have this smacking of this like ivory tower with actually the emperor has no clothes. You guys don't know anything.
Right,
You said this,
right.
and of course we're all painted with the same brush.
Right.
And so now that's left a void. That's left a void because the desire for information hasn't gone
Right.
away.
And authority. People want authority.
They want authority, but we now
Not
don't.
us.
So now anybody can come
Yeah.
in and say, "Hey, here's 2 lines of reasoning. Take it."
Right.
They're not looking and say, "Where'd you get? What's your credentials? What's your
Right.
certification?" So I
What's
think
the context? What's the
no,
nuance?
yeah, and they want it to be a soundbite. And
Yeah.
nuance is the opposite of 60 seconds or less, right?
100%.
And so I think like how you've teed up, your journey, and how you go about things, I find very refreshing. I think it's incredibly informative. So I want to, if it's okay, I want to just kind of like go over a handful of topics
Let's do it.
that and I'll try to go through the ages, right? Because we have folks that are listening that have teenagers. We have folks that are like they're about to go through the toddler years again. So, if we could just start with, you have the baby. One of the first things that comes to mind, even during pregnancies, breast versus formula. Just you're doing a prenatal consult today in 2024 with all I'm a pregnant mom. I'm a G1, right? And I say, hey, I really want to breastfeed. I'm hoping to breastfeed. I'm going to do everything I can. What do you think?
Yeah. So that's great. And I'll try to be a little bit more on task answering it because I could literally talk about this. My residents will tell you I give hour-long impromptu talks about the history of breast is best and fed is best and our institutional issues with it. So I could give you context for days. Context is key. That being said, you're coming to me, right? I'm meeting you where you are. You're coming to me eager to breastfeed. That's great. Breastfeeding does have benefits. It doesn't have only benefits. There are downsides. It can be stressful. It can exacerbate sleep deprivation. It can be challenging for mood disorders. If people don't know how to recognize when it's not working, then you can actually not feed a baby enough. So it's not like, oh yes, it's absolutely the best in every single situation. But I do think it's worth trying. And what I outline in my book chapter on it is that when you say breastfeeding doesn't matter, you essentially disenfranchise someone from trying it and being supported in it because there is benefit to it in many situations, if not most supported situations. It's not all or none. There are most situations where at some point babies will get formulas, whether it's later on or a return to work or just because you want to give one bottle while you establish your supply. It's not a big deal. Those things are totally going to happen. But the big picture of breast versus formula, this whole weird binary that's being put out there is serving no one except for, like you said, sound bites in certain industries. The intention might be good for someone to say, don't worry about breastfeeding. I don't want you to feel pressured. But again, that doesn't give someone the information they need and deserve, which is, hey, breastfeeding can be good.
Right.
Let's give it a try. So I think that's the important context. And then the important, what do you do? I didn't go to any breastfeeding classes. I didn't prepare myself at all because I was like, I'm a pediatrician. I'm going to breastfeed. And it was miserable. It was a terrible experience. I tortured myself pumping. I didn't get a latch. I did all the wrong things in retrospect. I let my depression get worse. I let my work situation and sleep get worse. It was just like a series of things of me not supporting myself. Right. Absolutely the second time around, I knew that I had to be proactive about it. I had to actually educate myself on what breastfeeding is. It sounds silly how would you take a breastfeeding course before you have a baby? There's just some basic things that are good to know. Yeah. It's good to get a course. It's good to understand what colostrum is and if you want to express it. It's good to know what to expect the first few days. It's good to know the difference between pumping and latching and how those affect supply. Yep. And what on-demand feeding really is, how to know if it's working or not, who you're going to work with going forward. Those are things that our society really has shown no interest in making accessible to people. Yep. But then when breastfeeding doesn't work, quote unquote, we're just like, oh, see, we're terrible at breastfeeding. Moms are so bad at breastfeeding. No, breastfeeding's hard and it takes a lot of work. But moms aren't bad at it. They're just under supported at it. And so you can't fix society, but you can do some basic prep work. And I really tried to be, in my book, what was different, instead of having a long chapter of like breast versus formula. I don't know. I think that's kind of a boring conversation at this point, because that's the wrong question.
Right.
The question isn't, should you breastfeed? Only you know the answer to that. I can give you the reasons why it might be a good idea, and then you'll decide. And then the question is how.
Yeah.
The more interesting question is, how do I support you? How
Absolutely.
do you know if it's going well or not?
Yeah.
And there are things you can do to prepare. I really tried to lay those out concretely.
That's right on the money. I mean, and I think probably we're going to have like follow-up conversations where we could go deep. Like you said, each of these is like an expoundable kind of topic, right? But that's great. That's really good. And then I want to segue. I'm just going to try to go chronological. I think the notion of maternal self-care, I think we could imagine that, like, hey, they come in when they're in their second trimester, they're asking about what Lamaze class, CPR class. We could say what we want. I don't know if I've ever had a mom. I've honestly done thousands of prenatal consultations. I've never heard a mom. I've heard it all. Mm-hmm. I've never heard a mom come in and be like, about self-care.
Yeah.
And probably the first 12, 13, 14 years of my career, I never heard it. Mm-hmm. Recently, what happens is you'll have partners. Unfortunately, it comes from because the moms have so much kind of
to do.
Yeah, that they'll come like at 1 month of life, after like hell has and they'll be like, hey, what about self-care for the mom? Like kind of what you described. Like you're like in it and you're like trying to balance things. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about maternal self-care as a new mom?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like an oxymoron. Sometimes you're like, oh, like I still exist and there's time for me. I mean, you can get really like cutesy and glib about it even, and be like, oh, like bubble baths and blah, blah, blah. Like that doesn't help. But and that's true. Like, I'm not here to say like, oh, don't forget to shower. Let someone else hold the baby. Like that stuff is all nice. But to me, it's a fundamental reframe of how we are treating the mom and baby dyad as this sort of separate thing. So there's mom and there's baby's health. One, I think that's incorrect. I also think it's further incorrect that we love to say that if mom is suffering, that's okay, or somehow even better for baby, because it's like a sacrifice for them. So like she's squeezing her breasts until they bleed because it's going to give breast milk to the baby. We can tolerate that. And it's not only that we can't tolerate that suffering for mom, but it's like that hurts baby. Like we know that increased stress in moms can lead to worse outcomes in babies. We know postpartum depression leads to worse outcome in babies, postpartum anxiety. We know that I see one question that to me is very connected to self-care, people don't always think about, is like medications that moms take. So I have so many parents, so many moms being told by practitioners who didn't know the science, who would say, they took me off this medicine when I was pregnant. They took me off this medicine when I was breastfeeding. And I was just like, not only is that unnecessary and dangerous for you, that makes no sense for the baby. Yeah. The baby does well if you do well.
100%.
Like,
I have those conversations all the time.
So it's just this reframe. I don't have a great answer or a great solution, but it's this reframe of like, we're not like taking care of the mom to be nice. Yeah. Like I wish everyone was just like wanted to be nice to me. That's a utopian world I don't think we even have to get to. Yeah. You're taking care of the mom, dummy, to take care of the baby. Yeah, and the things that keep her physically and mentally healthy, of course, let the baby do better. The way in which moms and babies communicate, through touch, through connection, through bond, there's so many intangibles. You're not going to be able to quantify that. Yeah. So you just have to trust that putting that energy into mom is not selfish and it's not tangential. It's not unrelated. It is like a core thing you can do for the infant.
100%. Awesome. Come in, the couple comes in, it's their 4-month well visit. And they're like, okay, doc, you were right. The first 2 months were harder. Things are a bit better, but he still doesn't sleep. We've heard about different ways to make him sleep. Yeah. We think we're ready, but like, do we really just let him cry it out? Or is there something else? I mean, if we have to, we will. Right. We're both going back to work. Our leave is done.
This is like a little like, I feel attacked because my baby is 7 months right now. And it's like, how long am I going to let this go before? before I do something to make her sleep. But
Do you want Dr. Baker's answer? I can give it to you.
well, okay, I'm going to give you my honest answer. It's been evolving. The honest answer is that I used to be a person of extremes. In residency, I had a great preceptor who told me you can start sleep training at 3 months and then you do this pathway and do Ferber.
Right.
And I will tell you, I was a resident. I was so miserable. My daughter wasn't sleeping. I was a resident. I just that's an 80-hour work week.
Yep.
So by the time 3.5 months came, I was like, we're sleep training. Like, that's what we're doing. And speaking to the point about mom self-care, that was really a self-care thing for me because I was not going to be able to survive being a mom and, not sleeping. And it wasn't good for me or my mood or anything. So I went with Ferber. It made sense to me. I did sort of a very gradual, short amounts of cry it out. Sure. My daughter responded well to it. That's the other thing. All babies are different. Yep. So she did well with it. We had already had a bedtime routine. Great, done. She slept more or less every night the rest of her life, and dream come true. And so I thought when I had my second daughter and I was, again, pretty miserable postpartum at first because of the sleep deprivation. I thought when we got to 3 months, I was going to be like, here it is. I'm going to let you cry. And I couldn't do it.
Right.
And I was like, oh, am I a hypocrite? Because I told people that sleep training was okay. Yeah. And ultimately had to reread my own words and go back to my own advice, which is just the idea that there is an all or none for sleep training, the idea that you have to or you can't. Right. There's not really science behind any of that. Yeah. Talking about the unhinged parenting internet, I get equally frustrated when I see kind of only 2 things about sleep out there. I mean, there's some nuance and there's some great people out there with sleep. But there's one narrative, which is you have to sleep train. Yeah. Babies will never learn to sleep. Yeah. Which I don't think makes any sense because I wasn't sleep trained and I can sleep.
They will eventually, yeah.
Yeah, it's just...
I wasn't sleep trained, yeah.
That doesn't...
Most of the world doesn't sleep train.
Right.
They look at us like we're nuts. The majority of the world is like, what do you mean you're going to ignore the kid?
For hours and hours. So that doesn't really make any sense. Obviously, people will eventually learn how to sleep, if we're going to just look at common sense and the data we have. But then you see these other things which are saying... Okay, but if you sleep train at all, even if you do gentler methods or you do any sort of behavioral shaping, you're a monster. Yeah. You might as well be in an orphanage with those studies where you never picked up the kid and then they became horribly abused. Yeah. And I think it's obviously if you see either of those things, you'll choose whichever aligns with you more. But there's no way either of those things can be true. Right. There's no way that it can be doing some sort of behavioral shaping based on the studies we have, and we do have some data on it, showing that the gentle methods seem safe enough. Yeah. And ultimately, only you will know if you need to sleep train, if you need to use it. It's a tool. Right. If you have created some system like me where you're okay nursing once overnight because you just want to and it's your last kid and you're okay snuggling with her and you're okay being tired and your commute's not so bad or whatever, then you don't have to sleep train. Right. But if you cannot sleep and you're me with my first daughter and your postpartum depression, anxiety are so bad and you don't have the support you need and you really just need getting that night's sleep means the next day you're going to be a better mom. You're going to be there 110% for your kid. And there's a whole world of gentler sleep training that you can do. I don't fault any parent for choosing that. Right. So that's a long way to say there are choices. You can do it. You don't have to. Useful. Yeah, yeah. I don't know what your sleep training philosophy is. I know it's very polarizing.
No. I tell my families all the time, you don't need to sleep. First of all, I never bring up sleep training. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of doctors will be like, at this visit, okay, you're going to more tummy time, start reading flash. And by the way, did you start sleep training? I don't bring it up. Because to me, it's just on the fundamental premise. It's a tool that if the parents want, I bring up, don't, show your kid your iPhone 24/7.
Right.
When they're
don't give them choking hazards.
Correct. I bring up
something proactive.
Avoid honey. There's things I bring up.
Totally.
I don't bring up sleep training because it's unnatural. Yeah. And if you want to do it, it's fine. I understand you're both going back to work. You're experiencing mental struggles, but by no means, I always tell my parents, if you're cool with it, I'm cool with it.
Right.
However, 1 out of 1 out of 2 or 3, right? I don't want to say the majority, but half or less are like, I can't take it. I need something. And when that balance tips, I say, okay, what I know to be the most effective way and quickest way is the Ferber method. But you have to be able to tolerate that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of nudging and modified versions that I can go over with you.
Right.
And
right.
As long as you understand, it might take longer. But if you stick to, there's less parameters. But if you stick to them, we'll get there. It might not be a week. It might be like 2 to 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
Right.
But just try to stick to those, and then we'll go from there. But just on the fundamental level, most of my families, I don't even talk about sleep training unless they bring up sleep training. When they bring it up, I give them those options on what can happen.
But that's rare, because if someone is willing to talk to you about sleep training, I think the vast majority of resources I find, they make it seem like it's mandatory. Right. And if someone is saying that it's not mandatory, they're making you feel like it's child abuse. Yeah. And I'm not trying to over sensationalize or harp on this, but it just to me, it's this ultimate, like, okay, a parent is looking for advice because it's helpful.
Right.
You don't want something that is prescriptive. You don't want something that makes you feel bad, but also you want something that fills a need. Like, and so to your point of like finding that pediatrician, finding that parenting expert who actually is interested in suiting your needs and answering your questions rather than their own agenda, right?
Exactly,
it's like, what's your agenda? What do you actually, what are you looking for? I can tell you about the sleep training technique I would do, but maybe that's totally irrelevant to you. Right. Maybe that's not a need you have. I can show you how to do breastfeeding, but if you have PTSD from your last breastfeeding and you absolutely don't want to do it and you want to dry your milk up from day one, I'm not here to tell you how to breastfeed. Like, that doesn't interest me. That doesn't help you. It doesn't help me.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's beautiful. Next topic.
Okay.
So now I'm going to put us at about 15 months. I'll give you 2 toddler topics, and then we'll go past that. So let's take somewhere between 15 months and 4 years of life. 2 big ones. He has tantrums, and no, Doc, I know you hear this all the time, but it's not like Jimmy. Like, you don't understand. He's possessed. I've tried everything, but he'll like start banging his head. I've tried everything. I've tried timeout. I've tried this. Just the worst tantrums you can imagine. So that's one. And then the other one is the picky eater.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I have 2 different behavioral chapters in my second book, and I have a picky eating chapter too. It's funny. The questions are all, every question is slightly different, but it's all the same, right? It's all, what are the tools to help me deal with this monstrously unregulated child? Right. I mean, that's what a toddler is. Right. A toddler is just this. I mean, it's not their fault. That's their little brains. They just don't have the wiring that they need. Yeah. So I spend some time kind of explaining why children are dysregulated, how their brains are evolving. And then I do give tools. I give some strategies. Some of it is about expectation setting, what might be normal, what might not be normal. Yeah. Some of it is some tools for how you can model emotional regulation kind of when the things are calm. And then more things like what you can do as tantrums build up, how you can redirect. I'm a believer personally of when it's the height of a tantrum that it's just like, how you like come home from work one day and something really bad happened and someone is just, I don't know, something triggers you and you're just like a mess, like sob. I think if someone who I was with either ignored me or told me I was being irrational, I don't think that would help.
Right.
So I have evolved into someone who's more during those peak emotional moments of being more responsive. I do think there's common sense behind that and probably some good psychological theory based on what I'm seeing. But again, it's not all or none. Sometimes that's exhausting. Sometimes that your kid is smacking you in the face and biting you and you need to step away as long as your kid is safe. That's a tool too that you can use during those times. So there's sort of this toolbox that I've gotten from really amazing tantrum experts. It's not a black and white toolbox. It's not a script for exactly what to do during a tantrum, but it's all these different strategies that will just kind of get you safely to the other side and get you through it. Like, that's more important than anything. Yeah, it's important that your kid sees baseline emotional regulation and feels loved. Right. Those are so anything that falls in those categories is what you need. And then you need to get through it. You need to get to the other side so you can go back to being a parent and not a crisis crisis manager. So I think it's not an easy answer, but I definitely think it's very possible to create your own tantrum playbook.
Yeah.
But it takes time. And the last thing I'm going to sort of harp on is it's your kid, right? So the tantrum playbook that works for my kid, I think is a pretty good playbook. I don't know that it's going to work for your kid at all. Like, your kid is a very different kid.
Yeah.
Your kid might actually do really well with hugs in the middle of their tantrum, and that might calm them down. Someone else's kid might just scratch you more and actually just wants to go sit and build a Lego for a minute. So again, we can have all this dynamic input that we're putting in and all this variable input, like we talked about, from experts, from us, from pediatricians, from parents. But it's ultimately the most important thing that I see missing from these parenting guides out there is it all goes into the wild card slot machine that is your child.
Right.
You cannot control your child's output, and you wouldn't want to, because then they'd be a puppet, and that would be uninteresting and unhealthy.
So picky eating.
Okay, so picky eating is another one, again, where it's like, I think you were telling the story of, my kid, do I give them the food that that I wanted to give them, and if they don't eat, they go to bed and they won't starve, or do I just keep feeding them and obsessing over it? Again, it's a broken record, variations on a theme. Everything is very black or white. And the idea is you have to introduce variety. You have to make sure they have a totally nutritious diet, or it is whatever it is. They're not going to starve. You can't pathologize food. The answer for you is probably somewhere in the middle, most likely. There are certainly cases where kids either have behavioral disorders, medical disorders, autism spectrum disorders, or even other underlying GI pathologies where they actually will starve themselves. I'm not saying that that's common, but I once had a parent who got basically extremely jaded by the whole pediatric establishment because someone, their pediatrician, someone was saying, your kid won't starve, your kid won't, just offer them whatever. And their kid ended up having some underlying medical diagnosis that they were, and it was what the person meant to say was, if we track their weight and their development and macronutrients, and we make sure that everything is okay, and they're still growing and all that stuff, then it'll be fine. But the sort of glib shorthand, they're not going to starve thing, was really frustrating to this parent. And I've talked to other parents since then being like, what I'm hearing you say is there's no problem. Right. And what I'm telling you is there's a problem with picky eating. So then the question is, okay, I believe whenever parents say there's a problem, I always believe there's a problem. Right. But are we talking about the right problem? Right. Is it that they are actually probably having enough variety of food, but it's just not the way that you thought it would happen? Exactly. Or it's not making the meal structure, or it's not meeting the expectations that someone's telling you online. Someone's telling you need 20 foods and your kid has 14 foods. Right. The problem then is the information that you've been getting, so we need to readdress that. Versus, this kid literally has only had chicken nuggets and now has scurvy, something I have actually seen. Yeah. That's a different problem that we need to talk about. Yeah. And at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do with picky eating, because there is a lot of studies that show you can do everything you want to do and they're still going to be what they're going to be. Yep. They're still going to be picky, and it's still going to probably go away with time. Yeah. There's only so much input that you can change. Yeah. So just that reframe of, is there a problem and what is the problem?
That's a great way to frame it.
Is it's kind of put the question on its head, put the issue on its head a little bit.
That's a great way to think about it. I want to cover I want to get through the adolescents with 2 or 3 topics. Okay. And then I have 1 or 2 closing questions, because I could talk to you forever. So I want to be respectful of your time. So now as you get into, let's say, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, Dr. Baker, no screen time the first 2 years, the guidelines. And then it said 20 minutes this, that. But Samantha's 8, and she has to use the screen, the iPad for school. And, her friends are all on, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Screen time, and we've spent a lot of time talking about how things aren't black and white. But I mean, I don't know if you saw the best-selling book right now, The Anxious, whatever. Yeah. So there's a lot of extremism. There's a lot of extreme perspective even from academia now.
Yeah.
So can you come at 7-year-old, 10-year-old let's 11-year-old. I think to be honest, it's even a separate conversation for teenagers, but because they're accessing stuff that's a little different.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
preteens, I find the screen time issues are more wiring, brain, noise, color issues than the content itself.
Right.
Like,
Right.
of course, I'm simplifying, but I don't have many families coming in concerned about the content that their 8-year-old seeing on the screen. It's more, hey, he's
just on it all the
right,
time, addicted.
right.
Or, yeah.
Take your pick, like
Yeah.
Mr. Beast or Miss Rachel, whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas when they're 16, now you have a multi-front war, right?
Right.
So can you talk, maybe cover it in your own way, like screen time and
Yeah, screen time's tough, and it's such an example of not only how extremist and polarized things are, but kind of like I think just like a lack of nuance on understanding what we're even talking about, because it's complicated. It's not like, do I take this medicine or not? It's like the word screen. What's a screen? It's a Kindle. That's like an example. But okay, am I watching a movie with my friends?
Right.
Am I actually sitting there on my phone on social media as
Or
an
homework.
11-year-old?
Most
Am
homework.
Exactly? So
my kids don't know what a book is. Every
Yeah.
assignment, like they come home every assignment, like when I'm doing their homework with them. Yeah.
So again, it's sort of like it's become this boogeyman, the word screen, and I think that's like
It has, yeah.
it's worth being cautious about. It's worth being limiting about, and it's worth being really deliberate about. But the word screen time has kind of lost all meaning to me in a way that just like I feel like is not. It just takes the meaning out of the conversation, and it gives it this like black and white, screens, no screens, this or that. Not all screens are the same. Some screens are better than
Dean's
others.
gonna throw this in my face when he hears this?
Yeah.
Oh no, because you're really anti-screen time.
No, I'm not really into.
Which
no,
is- I
no,
am-
I'm a
yeah.
parent. I'm a parent,
Yeah.
and I spend a lot of time being like, dude, it's been 3 hours. Stop.
No, but
right?
that's-
But my oldest is a bit of a wise. Like he could be like, hey Z, hey Dad, yeah, but you interviewed another pediatrician, and you said she's really smart, and apparently she has a different perspective on this.
I don't know if
You'll throw that right
I
back
don't
to
know
her.
if my perspective's that different though. No, I don't think it is because I am very pro limiting screen time.
Yeah.
I just think it all depends about the context of what you're doing, the types of screen time you're doing, how you're making these limits. Are they based in aggregate, on average? Are you being really strict and that doesn't work for your family? I'm just again about here's the information we have. Less screens better, more screens worse. Right. That's kind of where it's landing right now. And as we know, medicine is evolving. So that can be the hard thing. Like when we take too hardline stances in pediatrics especially, and then things evolve, then we lose trust.
Yeah.
And so I'm reluctant to come out and say, no screens. Screens are poison. Screens are bad. They're cigarettes. No child can have a screen.
Which is what a lot of the literature that's being spoon-fed to us is using that kind of language.
But the problem is, okay, that's great, but like that's great if I live maybe on a farm with no screens and in the 1830s.
Yeah.
But like right now, my homework is on a screen.
Yeah.
My mom has to use her screen. You're not even talking about how my mom uses her screen, and like me, how I regulate my screen time is probably more important in so many ways than how many, movies we watch together as a family. So it's all getting jumbled together and starting to feel a little meaningless in black and white. Whereas it would be nice if we could get together and say, here's what we know. A lot of screens without thoughtful use is bad.
So take this conversation and narrow it to a more poignant discussion around social media specifically. So now let's shift to like the 14-year-old. The mom comes in and Samantha is, she's a good kid, but sometimes I worry she's moody. She's like, if I take away the phone and she's on Instagram and Facebook or whatever, can we talk a little bit about
I think the way I frame that, and again, I don't have teenagers yet, but the
Take
way
mine.
we'll try. We can trade maybe for a little bit. Yeah. But the way I frame the social media thing is I like looking at everything about risk benefit, when it comes to you and your family. So the benefit to me that I've seen of like not following strict screen time rules in a toddler is that I'm going to let my daughter watch a movie. It's going to be a relatively nice social time on a rainy day. I get to go in and out of a nap. That's a situation that seems to have a fair amount of benefit. Sure. I'm also doing other developmental activities. I'm not sitting there buying her a tablet for herself. So like in aggregate, I've balanced risk and benefit in this situation. I'm showing her that screens exist in the modern world and how to use them. When you get to social media, again, every family is different, but I do think it becomes harder. I think it's important to be really specific about risk and benefit, because what is the benefit in that situation of your 14-year-old being on TikTok? I don't know. I'm not an expert in TikTok. I don't have TikTok, but and I don't have teenagers. But to me, that specific ask seems okay. We can narrow on that a little more. That doesn't seem to have as much benefit in that situation. But there is emerging evidence of harm. So sort of the burden of proof to show how harmful it is becomes less because the benefit is less.
Yeah.
And
what if the benefit in that case, like if you take, I was going to say wise ass, let's say smart 14 or 15-year-old who says, well, mom, or dad, the benefit is recreation and also normative social communication, because that's what they'll say.
I think the normative social thing is the hard one. Recreation, I don't know. You'll do something else. You can find something else. Kids can be bored. Like,
Fair. Yeah.
You know, I wish my kid needs to learn to be bored. That's something I do too much. She's like, Mom, what can I do? I'm like, I don't know. One of the million
Go
things
meditate.
I've bought for you.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
literally figure something out. You leave her for 5 minutes, then 2 hours later, she's entertained herself, right? So there's some boredom is good, especially for anxiety and distress tolerance and all of that. Social norm stuff, man, I just keep hoping things will be better by the time I have teenagers. And I know there are movements with parents. I think if this is something that's important to you, and I think it's something that will be important to me, finding groups of parents, finding that community. Fortunately, there is this counter movement about it. And I think that's the type of activism that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. So I would
And
support it. Yeah.
Can we be, are you talking, I just want to be clear. You're talking about like when parents, and even now there's some school districts and like minor legislation, surprisingly starting in the Midwest, where they're saying, okay, no phones during school hours, for instance.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about. Where and the like the
or no social media until a certain age,
or
no
age
no
gating.
smartphones until 8th grade. Like there's certain trying to sort of contract so that parents are making these rules together so they don't come home and say, I'm the only one in my class. I'm getting bullied because everyone else has an Instagram.
Right. And that and what we've learned is that piece is the driving piece. It's not necessarily that the kid wants it. It's that the kid needs it because everybody else has it. And therefore, if everybody else doesn't have it, you could remove the delirious effects.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, we're kind of on the impetus, maybe not. Right. Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah.
So I have one more adolescent question, and then they're going to go off to college. And then we can, and then I have some maybe personal, professional, 1 or 2 questions. This is honestly one of the best conversations I've had in like the year and a half or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
excellent.
I feel like such a moron. That's the first time I'm interviewing like a peer, I said, how many cardiologists or whatever, psychiatrist or endocrinologist have we done? So
Never did a pediatrician.
right. And so, there is a very, very high, I guess it's there's a very high rate of mental health disorders in, young adults or old pediatric patients, however you want to put it. Even younger ones. But I mean, once kids hit puberty now, are 13, 14, 15, 16, especially the girls, but in both, it's like depression, anxiety, not to like be too reductive. I was telling Mo and the team, when I first came out, this is true. I think I'm a little older than you, but when I first came out, if I made a mental health referral, this is like 15, 16 years ago. If I made a mental health referral, the office would stop. Like if I was like, oh, this 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old needs to see psych or something, or needs therapy, the office is like, what? Like, where do we even send them? Because it was all the referrals were derm, ENT, cardio.
Yeah.
Today, and this is not an exaggeration. You could ask, Mo works with me. Today, I make more mental health referrals than all the medical referrals combined.
I believe that.
More like
that surprises me. Zero.
I'll send Pulm once a week, ENT twice a week, cardio once every 2 weeks, and we'll do a mental health referral twice a day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why has that happened?
God, that is a hard-hitting question. I think I don't know. I don't know that I have the full answer to that. I mean, entire people are writing books on it. They're blaming smartphones. They're blaming the state of the world around us. I think there's certainly some element of increased recognition, which we talk about in medicine a lot when things become either destigmatized or the criteria become more inclusive of something. The rates of it can look like it go up. I don't think that's going to explain all of it. But yeah, I think there's got to be some magical convergence of, listen, these are unprecedented times. You've got kids with not really any more resources to their mental health, but they are less stigmatized, thankfully, about it and being able to talk about it and access it and get diagnosed, and providers are being trained more in diagnosing it. But then there's this resources, this standstill where we can't get mental health appointments for kids for like 6 months or something like that. This is a kid who's like dangerously depressed and I don't know what to do. So you get this total like backlog in the system where we're increasingly having higher rates of things. I think it just cycles on itself because the old problems don't go away. The new cases come up. And I think it's just like, it's reached this crisis point.
Yeah. It's pretty also like it's a pretty desperate situation for the doctors because you're exactly what you said. Actually, Mo and I were with a chairman of a pediatric department today.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Who's like, hey, how can we work together? And they're like, look at all these pediatric surgery services we have, and we recruited this guy or whatever. And I'm like, my friend, I'll tell you what, you will be the only folks we work with if you could do me one favor. Anytime I have a mental health, you get them in a timely fashion. Well, he like shifted 3 times.
Yeah.
He's like, but you know, we have 6 cardiologists.
Yeah.
I'm like,
no, it's our only need, but it's not what's being resourced in
Yeah.
this country and being funded and being prioritized. And I will tell you, it's the same thing. Every single meeting I have with my group, we're like, what if we had a psychologist? What if we had this referral system?
Yeah.
Like it's been my whole career. We're just looking for it.
Yeah, I'm to be honest, one topic, and if you know anybody, we can all get together and have a conversation, for the benefit of the folks that listen. But like, I'm searching for like, now I'm not searching for an explanation to that question out of just like academic interest.
Yeah.
But an answer to that question is a good place to start on how to deal with it.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Like some root cause analysis. And,
Yeah.
And it's like, and you know, every time I contemplate like why I'm seeing so many kids with like mental health issues, and we didn't quote unquote, and again, we've elasticized the definition of it, like, you know, but
even so,
like,
Yeah.
right. Why it is like, and then every time I start to go down like a mental, like, I'm like, okay, you know what it is? Maybe it is the social media because they're comparing themselves to these unrealistic images. I'm like, you know what, dude, when I was a kid, I would watch Michael Jordan fly through the air. And it was unrealistic, but I looked at it as just inspiring. I didn't think of it. Now I'm being super reductive. I get it.
Right. Or like I had my fashion magazines and now actually there's more body positivity. So I didn't have that.
Better
so
example.
It's just like, you're just trying to think like, it can't just be this one thing.
Right.
There can't just be like,
great
what's
example.
the smoking gun?
So what is it? And like in some cases, I'm like, actually parents are more supportive than ever. Like they're like,
Yeah.
you know, there's more parenting books and advice than there. My parents didn't read my parents did it like just off the cuff.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Good luck.
You know, yeah. Like, and so it's not that. And then you're thinking like, well, is it the stress on the kids? Is it the food is it like, I'm trying to think like, and I'm searching. If you know some folks that you admire, you're like, Z, none of us have the right answer, but these are folks that like, we should have that conversation.
Yeah, I think so too. I think probably at the end of the day, because there's no single sexy answer, that's why we haven't like, there's no one that we've like, you know, someone is going to tell you it's because we eat food. Someone is going to tell you it's because of the phone. Someone is going to tell you because we don't do enough activity. Someone's going to tell you because literally there's a pandemic going on. Like all of those things may be true.
Yeah.
But how they all interplay and how exactly that all adds up, I don't know. I don't know who the expert is on that, but someone's got to be able to take a nuanced take on it.
And then my final question, and then Mo, I don't know if you have any comments or questions. My final question to what's been an unbelievable conversation. What do you love the most about what you do as a pediatrician?
Oh my God. Why would that be the hardest question to me? It's so funny. No, it's because I really do love being a pediatrician. It's here's the way I answer it. The reason I knew that I was in the right field is that people always say, "Oh, I love kids, but it's the parents that I don't like that are so hard." I don't know if you've heard that when anyone who like
my brother's an adult primary.
Yeah.
So he's like, "Hey, how do you, I'm like, how do you deal with them?"
So
that's what we were talking about that before.
Yeah. So but you know what I realized was like, oh, I actually love dealing with the parents. I actually love being able to find that intersection between a medical decision and a parenting decision. You know, even when we're talking about something, this is what I teach my residents, talking about like tube feeding. And you might think there's a right answer for how to do a tube feed of a kid who needs like a nasogastric tube or a gastric tube. You might think there's the correct rate and the correct this and the science. But that is a parent feeding their kid. And I bet you 100 times out of 100, the schedule that the parent is telling you is the right schedule because that parent knows how to feed their kid. They would know it if they didn't have a tube, and they would know it if they did have a tube. Right. And so what I love most about my job is being able to come in and tell parents, you're like you said, we're co-parenting. Yeah. Like you are going to parent your kid. I'm going to give you these tools. I don't know better than you. I know different things than you. And we have to make that decision. Yeah. You have to feel comfortable making it. And being able to do that, and then also working with resident doctors and medical students and being able to model that. Right. And saying it takes a lot of humility. Yeah. But you have to have a lot of trust that you're going to be able to guide things, but you have to let people try on their own.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this was an incredible conversation. I look forward to hopefully having some follow-up conversations.
Absolutely.
And Mo and Diana are going to put some of the links down. Like a small child. Hold them up, and then we're going to put the links, right, and all the information.
We should put these in our offices.
That's a great idea.
These are your gifts.
Put them in their offices. That's a great idea. Yeah. I love it. I actually read some of the first one. So hopefully we can have the follow-up conversation.
Absolutely.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.